And I wanted to begin by saying thank you to Bruce and Mark for the last quarter, for teaching the last quarter. It is not easy to teach class. It's not easy to teach class. It doesn't matter what the class it is. It is not easy. So I very much appreciate them, their willingness to take the last quarter to give me a little bit of a break, and I'm thankful for their classes. And now you're stuck with me again. So, sorry. Concerning tonight's study, and because everyone has the question, where are we picking up at? And feel free to agree or disagree with this. I have a lot of trouble with the Kings of keeping things straight. Am I the only one that has that trouble?
No, because there's so many.
So go ahead, Ree. I mean, there's so many, and what are we dealing with here?
Well, first of all, the kingdom is now divided.
Right. So
before you just had one king
right
through Solomon.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you got multiple kings in the northern kingdoms of Israel, and then the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin. The rest of them are in the northern kingdom. There's kings, and now you're keeping track of who's good and who's not.
Right.
It really takes. There's so many names, and it's not
right.
like John and Fred. It's
yeah.
a mouthful. So.
And what really throws you is, like, sometimes you can tell, like, one kingdom's having an influence on the other kingdom, and it's like they're trying to pay homage to the other kingdom for whatever reason. So you look up the name Joash or Jehoash, and guess what? Well, you might be talking about there was a king named that in the northern kingdom, and there's a king named that in the southern kingdom. So then it's like, well, which Joash are we talking about here? And so you go through and you read it, and it's like it's flipping back and forth between northern, southern, northern, southern, northern, southern, and trying to keep the timeline straight. And it's like, I get dizzy. Go ahead, Rudy.
And also, the scriptures themselves reference books that are no longer in the scriptures, and it'll talk about the book of the kings of Israel, and then it'll talk about the book it's seen in the book of kings of Judah.
It seemed like Jehu was mentioned, and yeah.
And so now it's, where are those books?
They're
all consolidated in kings,
right.
Or where are they?
Right.
They're not.
Right.
They have enough, but
yeah.
Then again.
And then it's like you start getting even more dizzy. Go ahead, Brenda.
I noticed more in the Southern Kingdom. It doesn't necessarily follow the lineage of, like Rehoboam came from Solomon, but then, Jeroboam came in,
right?
And I don't remember any of his descendants really coming into the kingship.
Well, it's like multiple times all of a sudden the Lord's like, I'm going to cut off your house.
Yeah, but there's also assassinations,
right?
And there's some that don't hardly last any time, and then there's others that last forever.
So one of the times that's going to come into play, do you remember? And actually, it's kind of where, if you looked at tonight's lesson with Elijah, when Elijah runs from Jezebel, and then, the Lord's like, he's not in the fire, he's not in the, those three things, he's in the still small voice. And the Lord says to Elijah, what are you doing? And Elijah says, oh, I've been very zealous for the Lord, and I'm the only one that's left. And it's like, no, you're not the only one that's left. And we'll get there eventually. But the Lord says, you need to go back, and you're going to start appointing people. And he's going to appoint, and it's really weird. It's like you read it, and it's one thing to read it, but then you start thinking about, it's like, wait a minute, what? He's told he's going to go back and appoint Hazael king in Syria. And it's like, what exactly gave me the right? That just brings in a whole nother country. You're going to appoint Hazael. You're going to appoint Elisha in your place. It's like, okay. And you're going to appoint Jehu. And then this is where it gets PG-13 pretty quickly. The Lord says, whoever Hazael doesn't kill, Elisha, he goes through, he's like, whoever one doesn't kill, the other one's going to kill, and whoever that one doesn't kill, Jehu's going to kill. And you know what Jehu does? Jehu does a lot of killing. And it's one of those places where it's like, where did Jehu come from? He was not the previous king's heir, but all of a sudden he's king now. And it's like, so now you're talking about, like assassinations, and some of those are authorized by the Lord and stuff like that. Ahab's family, and it's like they're going to be, and that's in Jehu's time as well. So it goes back and forth, and it's very difficult to keep it straight. It's very difficult for me to keep it straight. One of the things that adds to that difficulty, and I tell you what, I had this handout. I found this online. I thought it was a pretty good handout just for the divided kingdom. So the way it's broken up, you have two halves, and it's front and back. So you have two halves. On the left, it's Judah. On the right, it's Israel. Okay, so on the left, it's the southern kingdom. On the right, it's the northern kingdom. And so it goes through, it gives the years of their reign on the left. Okay, so Rehoboam, his reign started around 931. Some of this is in the back of Padfield's notes. I don't know if y'all looked at like the last few pages of Padfield's workbook, and I looked it up online, and the problem was not with the printer. The problem was with Padfield's material. It's hard to read. And that's just a reality. But on page like 20 and 21, he has a lot of this material. It's hard to read. Some of the dates aren't exactly the same as the handout, but they're pretty close, within a year or two. So there's a little bit of wiggle room. But on the handout, you have the years of their reign. And like for me, like Rehoboam, it's like, okay, well, when did Rehoboam reign? When are we talking about? And it's like, 931 BC. And it's like, that is much closer to the time of Christ than I thought it was. Like if I was just throwing a number out without knowing anything, I'd be like, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 BC. It's less than 1,000 years before Christ. And that's Rehoboam. Okay? So you have the years of their reign. You have the king. You have how they start and how they end as far as evil or good. I'll tell you right now, as we go through this study, it's not always clear cut. There are times, even kings that are, for example, Asa. Asa is described as a good king. Even here, he starts good, he ends good. Well, guess what? Something happens in Asa's life that's not good at all. We'll get into it. Okay? You also have the different prophets. So there's different prophets while different kings are reigning. And so there are prophets for the northern kingdom. There are prophets for the southern kingdom. So for example, Elijah and Elisha are prophets for the northern kingdom, right? They're not even prophets for Judah and Benjamin. They're prophets for the other 10 tribes. That's why Elijah, when Elijah first comes on the scene, anybody remember who the king is? It's Ahab. It's like we're talking about the northern tribes. And so you have the different prophets, and some of them have question marks after them, especially Obadiah. But some of the prophets lived so long that they cover more than one king. So like on the back page, like Isaiah covers a lot of the kings. Okay? Just because of how lengthy Isaiah is. So you have the prophets, you also have the scriptures. And this is where concerning the scriptures, you have 1st and 2nd Kings, but you also have 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And so we've been going through the Kings. Well, Chronicles parallels the Kings. And so it's like in the Gospels, when you look at the Gospels, you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, and they all complement one another, and they start filling in details of each other. So you might read something in Luke, for example, and Luke is the only gospel that includes when Jesus was 12. You don't get that from Matthew, Mark, or John. So it's like you start filling in some of the details, and they're all, they're like that. Well, you can say the same thing about the Kings and the Chronicles. Chronicles starts filling in details, and I'll tell you, I don't know if it's just because Kings comes first. Usually people spend more time in Kings. I think Kings is a little bit of an easier read. Chronicles, actually, the first few chapters in Chronicles, turn over to 1 Chronicles chapter 1. Do what, Rudy?
Just saying it's all the, if I remember right, it's almost like a genie.
Yeah, exactly. Like the first 10 chapters or something like that. So like First Chronicles, so Kings doesn't do this, but Chronicles does. So First Chronicles starts with like the family of Adam from Seth to Abraham. And it's like, whoa, we're going all the way back. Yeah, we're going all the way back. Verse 34, the family of Isaac. The end of chapter 1, the kings of Edom. So you start getting in, and it's just like, it is the genealogies. Look over, but you can tell it's headed a certain way. Over in chapter 3 is the family of David. And then it gets into, Solomon. So it's going backwards and forwards and stuff like that, and every other which way. But chapter 5, you're still dealing with like the different families and genealogies. Chapter 6, still that way. Chapter 7, still that way. Chapter 8, still that way. Chapter 9, you start getting into who's dwelling in Jerusalem. The priests at Jerusalem, the Levites are in Jerusalem, the gatekeepers, Levite responsibilities. Then you get to chapter 10, and what's chapter 10? The tragic end of Saul and his sons. Like, oh, okay. Now we're starting to pick it up like historically. Okay? So chapter 10 is the tragic end of Saul and his sons. Chapter 11, David is made king over Israel. Chapter 12 is the growth of David's army. And we will start reading here in a minute, and we're trying to lay some groundwork. Okay, so chapter 13 is the ark is brought from Kirjath Jearim. You might notice, just look at verse 7. They carried the ark of God on a new cart, and all of a sudden you have those two men mentioned, Abinadab and Uzzah. And it's like, oh, we're near the Uzzah account. And we know what Uzzah's going to do. Put his hand out on the ark, all that business. Okay? Chapter 14, David is established at Jerusalem. Chapter 15, the ark is brought to Jerusalem. Finally, chapter 16, the ark is placed in the tabernacle. Chapter 17, chapter 18 are still about David, right? So we're like flying through First Chronicles. Chapter 21 is David's sinful census. Okay, now in your mind, and I tell you what, look at the handout. Don't look at the handout. The life of David, visualize in your mind. 1 Samuel, okay? 1 Samuel starts before Samuel's even born. Then Samuel's born. You have all of Samuel. Eventually they say, we want to give us a king. Okay? And I tell you what, this might be a good time. I'm kind of doing this out of order. I was going to do this later. So what this is something I've been working on for the last few weeks. And that's why I said if you can't see it, feel free to get closer. So what this is a timeline. Right? And I've put the kings in order on the timeline. So on the top is going to be on the top is going to be Judah. So I probably should have reversed it. On the top is going to be the southern kingdom. Brilliant, John. So on the top is going to be Judah, on the bottom, but we're not to the divided kingdom yet. That little bit of blue on the left, it's hard to see. That's the time of the judges. The time of the judges, according to Acts, lasts about 450 years. Okay, so if the first king is going to be Saul, Now Saul reigns in 1050. Okay. So even there, it's like, it's like, that's only 1,000 years before Jesus. We're not that far removed. So Saul starts reigning in 1050. And so you have the dots on the timeline, and those dots, each one is 5 years. Okay. If you can't see that. So Saul, I've made it green on one end and red on the other, because Saul, how does he start? He starts okay. How does he end? He ends horribly. Right? So he starts good, and he does a few good things. What's the name of the city he saves? Is it Jabesh Gilead? Seems like one of those cities that he does some good stuff. So Saul, his life covers from 1 Samuel chapter 8 through 1 Samuel chapter 31. That's how 1 Samuel ends, and is when Saul and Jonathan die in battle. Okay, so in your mind, it's like, that's all of 1 Samuel. That's the reign of Saul. Now, David's already come on the scene, but he's not king yet. Saul is still reigning. So some of the events from Saul's life, he's the first king of Israel, right? He does some good. He also does that unlawful sacrifice. He spares Agag and the best of the Amalekites. When Samuel comes, it's like, what's the bleating of the, the sheep I hear? He jealously tries to kill David, okay, because of the David and Goliath account. And they all start praising David. So he jealously tries to kill David more than once. He is spared by David multiple times. He's eventually killed by the Philistines. The prophets in his time are Samuel. So each one of these is going to be laid out that way. I'm going to have the passages at the top, the Kings and the Chronicles passages that parallel one another. You're going to have key events in their life, and some of the kings of Israel, it doesn't say much other than, they're evil. Okay, so some of them, not a lot happens, but then I'll also include the prophets that were in their time. Okay, so Saul keeps going, right? His reign continues until 1010, and then who's the next king? And now we're into the life of David. So David is going to reign from 1010 to 970. All right? But his life, or the narrative surrounds him, goes from 1 Samuel 16 all the way to 1 Kings chapter 2. So David's life is all of 1 Kings, some of 2 Samuel, or since 1 Samuel 16, all of 2 Samuel, and then 1 Kings chapter 2. So events that happened in David's life before he became king. Okay? You have the Goliath account. He's friends with Jonathan. He runs from Saul. The Nabal-Abigail account, he's not king yet. He's been anointed by Samuel, but Saul is still serving as king. He spares Saul twice, right? Once in the cave, once in the field. And all I'm trying to do is, like I said, the kings get me so discombobulated that it's like it's easy to miss details. These details, we're just kind of reviewing. During his time, the prophets, Samuel. We'll come back to that one though. So then you get into David's life once he becomes king. Okay, so events as king. Remember how basically it starts off and there's civil war, because at the beginning of his reign, you had Abner, and Abner wanted to establish Saul's other son, Ishbosheth. And so all of a sudden, there's war. Joab is general. We know what kind of guy Joab was. You have the ark and Uzzah. You have that account. Mephibosheth, David is king. Remember, that's when he's wanting to remember Jonathan and do something good. The Bathsheba account with Uriah. And I'll tell you, just in studying for class, that account, Bathsheba and Uriah, shows up at a weird place. It's mentioned later on in one of the lives of the kings, and it's real odd. I can't remember where it is now, but I'll have to hunt for it, but it shows up again. Amnon and Tamar and all of that nastiness, frankly. And remember, that's where you have Absalom who's going to defend his sister, and Absalom ends up killing Amnon. David ends up fleeing from Absalom. Eventually, David returns. Absalom's dead. David mourns for Absalom. Oh, Absalom, Absalom. And Absalom's gone. The way 2 Samuel ends is with David's sinful census. Right? And all of a sudden he wants to count the people, and Joab's like, I don't think that's a good idea. And David does it anyway. So you have the sinful census, and a lot of people died because of that. So the prophets during that time, one would be Nathan. Samuel dies at a certain point in that time frame as well. But I think you also have to include David as one of the prophets. And so at this time, what is it that's being written? The Psalms. It's like you have everything that David's writing. Okay? And so his reign goes all the way to 970. And then you have Solomon. So Solomon's going to reign from 970 to 931. Solomon's reign starts off with, remember, David told him before he died, David's like, you need to kill this guy, and this guy. And Solomon starts executing people. Some of them he gives a chance. Who is it? Is it Shimei, who he says, if you stay here and behave, you'll be all right. And Shimei doesn't do that. But he executes Adonijah, and isn't that Absalom's brother? So he executes Adonijah, he executes Joab, he executes Shimei, and continues on. And he reigns for a long time. So now we're covering from 1 Kings chapters 1 through 11 through 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. And so that's the parallel. So and that's where it starts, I don't know what the word is, befuddling. So Solomon is 1 Kings 1 through 11 and 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. You would think it would be 1 Kings and 1 Chronicles. Right? But those are the parallels. So the events in Solomon's life, he requests wisdom. Remember what God says? It's like, I'm giving you wisdom and I'm giving everything you didn't ask for as well. And so he gave him riches and all sorts of stuff. So you have wisdom, you have his wise judgments, right? The two women who come to him. He builds the temple. The tabernacle has been in place this whole time. So he finally builds the temple, right, by the plans. David wanted to, David wasn't allowed to. He got 700 wives and 300 concubines. And we know what's going to happen. His wives turned him from the Lord, and he's going to be building his whole life. And frankly, when his building starts, he's using a lot of foreigners. And as that building continues, he's using more and more natives. So that's why when he finally dies, they come to Rehoboam, and what do they say? Lighten us up, please. You're treating us like slaves. Okay? The prophets during Solomon's time, one is still Nathan. We see that early on when Adonijah presumed to be king, and that's when Nathan and Bathsheba come to David. David's an old man, and they're like, we thought you said Solomon was going to be king. Okay, so Nathan is still prophet. Solomon himself would be a prophet. And so you have all of Solomon's writings. So what would that be? It's a lot of the Proverbs, all of Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. So all of that's being written in this time frame. So then Solomon's reign finally comes to a close, and then you have who? Rehoboam. And this is where, so Rehoboam is going to reign from 931 to 913. And this is where, with Rehoboam, and what I would like to do is to look at the parallels tonight. And so let me check our time. So 1 Kings, so just on the surface, what's Rehoboam like? And like you read 1 Kings, is it 1 Kings? First Kings, and you're like, he is as evil as all get out. But then you read the Chronicles, and Chronicles gives some details that aren't in First Kings. So that's why Johnny was not losing his mind, although I normally am. How do I have Rehoboam highlighted? Red, except all the way to the left. And there's a little bit of green. And it's like, well, what is that about? Okay, so let's look in 1 Kings to begin with. So in 1 Kings, and like I said, we're going to go through this pretty quickly, but just I was trying to get my mind wrapped around it because it is so back and forth. And so we're not even to the divided kingdom yet. But I thought Rehoboam is a good way to show that we need to fill in some details. So 1 Kings chapter 11 is where I want to begin, because you can't mention Rehoboam without talking about Jeroboam. So which one came first, Rehoboam or Jeroboam? Guess what? It's Jeroboam. Jeroboam is mentioned first. Jeroboam is mentioned back in chapter 11. Okay, so back in chapter 11, you might notice chapter 11 at verse 26, then Solomon's servant Jeroboam. And so we're introduced to Jeroboam. This is where the prophet Ahijah takes a hold of his garment and rips it, right? And that's verse 30. Ahijah took hold of the new garment that was on him and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and will give 10 tribes to you. We ain't even talking about Rehoboam yet. We're talking about Solomon, okay? Because what have they done? Verse 33, they have forsaken me and worshiped the Ashtoreths. What was happening at the end of Solomon's reign? It's fallen apart. And it's like he's building temples to pagan gods literally across the road from the temple. And it's like, this is nuts. And so Ahijah, by direction of the Lord, is talking to Jeroboam. And he says, look down at verse 35 or verse 34. However, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, talking about Solomon, because I made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose because he kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand and give it to you, 10 tribes. And to his son I will give 1 tribe, that my servant David may always have a lamp before me. So it's like, it's a prophecy about the divided kingdom. But the Lord says, I'm not doing it in Solomon's life. I'm doing it in his son's life. Solomon's still reigning. Well, when Solomon hears about it, what do you think he wants to do to Jeroboam? Kill him. And that is verse 40. Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Now you hang on to that little tidbit. Where did Jeroboam run to? He runs to Egypt. It's like, okay, because that's going to show up again. So then we get into chapter 12, and it's the revolt against Jeroboam that we're real familiar with, okay? So now, look over in chapter 13. So chapter 12 ends with Jeroboam's golden calves and all that. Chapter 13, you have the man of God, and you have the prophecy. And what you have is the Josiah prophecy. Okay, so you might think about, so looking at your handout, let's see. So we're somewhere around between 931 and 913, right? Somewhere in that time frame. And he just prophesies about Josiah. Josiah is not on the front of the paper. Josiah is not going to be king until 640. Yeah. Like 300 to 400 years later. He by name. He's like, there's going to be a king named Josiah, right? That's chapter 13, verse 2. It's one of those amazing prophecies. And it's like, anyway, it's the Josiah prophecy. The last good king of Judah is Josiah. Everyone, there's 3 or 4 after Josiah, they're all evil. There's 4 after him, they're all evil. And that takes it to captivity, okay? So back to the reading, though, back in 1 Kings chapter 13. So you have this prophecy being made, okay? And then just notice, look down at verse, where do I? Actually, do me a favor. So you have all of that happening. Yeah. Keep coming through the through the life of Rehoboam, okay? The life of Rehoboam and the life of Jeroboam. So the remainder of chapter 13 is that weird account with the man of God, right? Where the man of God, where he's told, it's like, if they ask you to eat with you, if they ask you to eat with them, what are you supposed to say? Don't do it. And then the old prophet, what does the old prophet say? Oh, well, an angel talked to me. Come on home. And the guy says, well, okay. And it doesn't end well. Okay? So then you have chapter 14, and you have judgment on the house of Jeroboam. All right. Look over at verse 19 and verse 20 is where Jeroboam dies. And just to get where I want to get to, look down. We'll just skim verse 21. And Rehoboam the son of Solomon reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he became king. In your mind, how old is Rehoboam when he became king? When you visualize it, like without that date, I'd be like, maybe 20. It's like, no, he's 41. Rehoboam's 41 when he becomes king.
What chapter are you in?
This is chapter 14, verse 21. Okay? All right, so he's 41. He's going to reign 17 years in Jerusalem. They're going to do a lot of horrible stuff. You might notice verse 25. It happened in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. It's like, where did Jeroboam run to before? To Shishak, the king of Egypt. So all of a sudden, old Shishak is coming up against Jerusalem, and he takes away the treasures of the house of the Lord, verse 26. Took away all sorts of stuff. He takes away the gold shields, and this is where Rehoboam makes bronze shields. And what Rehoboam is going to do from this point on is he's going to try to guard things. But now notice verse 29 is where I really wanted to get to. Verse 29, now the rest of the acts of Rehoboam and all that he did, are they not written where? In Chronicles. Okay. So now come up to 2 Chronicles. And all of a sudden you start reading about Rehoboam in 2 Chronicles. It's like, wait a minute. There is more going on than meets the eye. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, in 2 Chronicles 11, and I would encourage you, if you have time, to read 2 Chronicles 11 and 12 just straight through. I'll try to hit the highlights. So 2 Chronicles 11, verse 1. Now when Rehoboam came to Jerusalem, he assembled from the house of Judah and Benjamin 180,000 chosen men who are warriors to fight against Israel. Right? Because when they all say, we're done and the kingdom's divided, at that point, Rehoboam's like, this is civil war, and we're ready to go to war. And what ends up happening, the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, and this is spoken about in the king's account. The word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, the man of God, saying, speak to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, to all Israel and Judah and Benjamin, saying, thus says the Lord, you shall not go up or fight against your brethren. Let every man return to his house, for this thing is from me. Therefore they obeyed the Lord, the words of the Lord, and they turned back from attacking Jeroboam. Like, okay. Keep looking. So Rehoboam dwelt in Jerusalem and built cities for defense in Judah. And it's like, all of a sudden think about our civil war. And when civil war broke out, what did both the North and the South have to do? They had to start the war machines. And that's what Rehoboam's doing. It's like, we have to gear up. He is fortifying and he's building cities for defense in Judah. Down at verse 13, this is one of the things that is not mentioned in Kings. From all their territories, the priests and the Levites who were in all Israel took their stand with him. For the Levites left their common lands and their possessions and came to Judah and Jerusalem, for Jeroboam and his sons had rejected them from serving as priests to the Lord. The next verse. Then he appointed for himself priests for the high places, for the demons and the calf idols. That part is mentioned in Kings, where it just says Jeroboam, he's appointing people from every tribe to be priests. But Kings does not mention he rejected all the Levites from being priests. And it's like, oh. So that's one of those details. And so they come. Now look at verse 17. And so they strengthened the kingdom of Judah and made Rehoboam the son of Solomon strong for 3 years, because they walked in the way of David and Solomon for 3 years. So that's why the graph is green all the way at the beginning. Because for 3 years, it looks like, and I know Rehoboam he has not heeded the counsel of the wise men. One of the lessons that I want to press upon you with each of these is things are very rarely clear cut. I mean, it's like our leaders. Whether you want to talk nationally or locally, like who's the mayor of North Ridgeville? Chewy's not here tonight. What's the mayor's name? Corcoran? Something like that. Is he a good guy or a bad guy?
I don't live here.
Well, you get on Facebook and it's like, oh, he's the worst guy ever. So does that mean he's never made a good decision in his life? Yeah. And so the kings are like that. I know scripture's like they're evil. Well, does that mean they've never made a good decision in their life? It's like, no, sometimes they actually do. It's like they walked in the ways of David and Solomon. Rehoboam walked in the ways of David and Solomon for 3 years. And what he's doing from verse 18 through the end of the chapter, he took for himself as wife Mahalath, the daughter of Jeremoth, the son of David, and of Abinail, the daughter of Eliah, the son of Jesse. She bore him children, names of children. Verse 20, he took Maacah, the granddaughter of Absalom. She bore him Abijah. Right? Verse 21 talks about who he loved. Verse 22, Rehoboam appointed Abijah, the son of Maacah, as chief to be leader among his brethren. Verse 23, he dealt wisely and dispersed some of his sons throughout all the territories of Judah and Benjamin to every fortified city, and he gave them provisions in abundance. He also sought many wives for them. And so he's trying to, frankly, I think he's trying to strengthen his family line. And granted, but it's sort of like Abraham. When Abraham sought a wife for Isaac, who does Abraham choose from? His own family, right? It was just accepted back then. So he's like, well, David's righteous, so I'm going to try to choose from the family. Okay, so that's what he's doing, and he's behaving wisely, it says. Now it came to pass, chapter 12, verse 1, when Rehoboam had established the kingdom and had strengthened himself, that he forsook the law of the Lord. Right? So for 3 years, everything's going okay, in a way. So for 3 years, he's behaving wisely, and then he starts he starts forsaking the law of the Lord. Verse 2, it happened in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that guess who shows up? Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. And you might look down. Shemaiah, verse 5, the prophet, says to Rehoboam, this is happening because you have forsaken me. The end of verse 5. So verse 6, what happens? So the leaders of Israel and the king did what? They humbled themselves. And guess what? Verse 7, the Lord heard their cry. The Lord saw they humbled themselves, and the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, and saying, they've humbled themselves, therefore I will not destroy them, but I will grant them deliverance. All right? Now there's going to be some stipulations there, things along those lines. But anyway, so my point in reading all of that and looking at it is Chronicles fills in details that Kings leaves out. You read the King's account and you're like, describe Rehoboam. Horrible. You read the Chronicles account and you're like, he made some bad decisions at a certain point and he forsook the law of the Lord. And even here, verse 14, chapter 12, verse 14, what does he do? He did evil. But that doesn't mean that he had always been evil. And that, yes, he did not heed the advice of Solomon's counselors, but talks about how he was doing things wisely, at least for a time. Okay, so I wanted to get up to that point. So with Rehoboam, so the events in his life, he listens to bad counsel, the kingdom divides, and that picture of all the Levites moving to Judah, that is a significant occurrence. And I wish we had more time. Egypt attacks, Rehoboam humbles himself. The prophets at that time are Shemaiah. One of the things I wanted to share is someone had mentioned some people like maps. Some people really like maps. And so someone asked if we could have more maps. And I know that's pretty tiny. That is a map of Israel at the time of Joshua. Okay, so that's the tribes. Even that map, I think, changes throughout Israel's history, even before the divided kingdom. For example, Dan. Where's my doohickey? Dan is there. That's the tribe of Dan. But we know from the time of the judges, the Danites were one of those people, they never drove out the natives. And so they go looking for a place that they can finally settle down, and guess where that is? That's all the way up there. So that's why I say that map, by the time you get to Rehoboam's time, that map does not look like that anymore, even in Rehoboam's time, before the kingdom divides. There are things happening. But when you do get to Rehoboam's time, that's the divided kingdom. All right, so that's how it divides. So there to the left of Judah, you have the Philistines, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, all that. So you have all of this happening, and that's why in Jeroboam's reign, in the time of Rehoboam, I think there were 48 Levite cities. That's a lot of cities. And that's where they all are. So all of a sudden, when Jeroboam says, you have no part here. And what do all those Levites do? We got to go to Judah. Okay? And so you have all that happening in the time of Rehoboam. And I'll say this concerning Jeroboam, we have about another minute. I had a few questions, and I might print out some of these questions. And if we will move quickly. But like I said, I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around it. And when you start talking about the divided kingdom, I get all turned around. So the prophet says to Jeroboam, I'm going to give you 10 tribes. Now the problem is, where's the temple? The temple's in Jerusalem. Well, where's Jerusalem? What tribe is that in? Benjamin, actually. It's right on the border. So if you're Jeroboam, it's like, how are all your people going to worship in another country? Because the kingdom's divided. So what does Jeroboam do? It's like, we'll set up the gold calves all the way up north in Dan and Bethel. But if you're Jeroboam, I can understand the pickle that Jeroboam was in, because by giving him the 10 tribes, it's like the temple's not in one of those 10 tribes. The temple's going to be in Judah. The temple's going to be in the southern kingdom. What are we supposed to do? And Jeroboam says it. If everybody keeps going down there, they're going to join back with the southern kingdom. One of the questions, and you can be thinking about it this week, from Rehoboam. When the revolt first starts, y'all come on in. When the revolt first starts, and there's about to be civil war, right? There's about to be civil war, and the prophet says to Rehoboam, frankly, put your sword away, to paraphrase it, right? He's like, there will be no war. And you might notice what I want you to think about is 2 Chronicles chapter 11 at verse 4. You shall not go up or fight against your brethren. Let every man return to his house, for this thing is from me. On some level, did the Lord want the kingdom divided? That's what we're going to think about. So be thinking about that. It's like, why would the Lord, that's frankly, to go back to our Civil War, that's kind of what our Civil War was about. When Abraham Lincoln quoted a house divided, and he's quoting the Bible, by the way, what a house divided will not what? It will not stand. That's a quotation from the New Testament. Well, in Rehoboam's time, what is the house? It's divided. And what's the Lord say? Let it happen. That's what we're going to talk about next time. So appreciate y'all's help. Like I said, I'm just trying to fill in details. I appreciate the classes that we've had. I have so much trouble with the Kings, it's not even funny. When you go through and you read them. So those of you who are downstairs, I have a handout if you want it that has a chronology of the Kings. So anyway, appreciate everyone being here tonight. Good to see everyone. Appreciate your help and attention.